without ignoring our history,
Mhm.
can we also connect to the present by creating new artworks that we not only exist in as Black people and artists, but we thrive inside of?
Welcome, everybody, to this new initiative by Music City Review. We are interviewing a really wonderful guest artist to the Nashville area. And my name is Yvonne Kendell. I write a writer for Music City Review, and I will be reviewing the wonderfully talented, in so many fascinating ways, Shamel Pitts. Let me start with a quotation. All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. And that is a quotation by Octavia Butler, who is an Afrofuturist writer. I want to introduce our guest, who is Shamel Pitts, as I said, a graduate of Juilliard School of Music, founder of the really fascinating dance ensemble called Tribe. He's also been a Guggenheim Fellow. He's a choreographer, and he danced with Baryshnikov's Hell's Kitchen ensemble. Tribe will be performing at Oz Arts on February 2nd and 3rd, 2024. Welcome. To get started, you often refer to yourself as a performance artist rather than a dancer. Is there a distinction that you're making?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Yvonne, and it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you through your platform, Music City Review. And just want to start by saying I'm very energized and propelled by the opportunity to share our work at Oz in Nashville. I've heard great things about what has been happening in that space for many years, and this is my premiere in the city and at the venue, and I'm thrilled and looking forward to bringing my work and my arts collective to Oz. The distinction between dancer and performance artist to me is, first and foremost, I am a dancer. I moved through life as a dancer. I grew up with my mother always throwing parties at home, where I was a kid around many different eclectic adults dancing at night until the morning. So part of how I live and move through life is as a dancer. But I think when the distinction between performance artist and dancer to me is one made of distinguishing the different structures and worlds that house performance artists and that house dancers. And although I come from the dance world, I very quickly realized that my work maybe was not of the lineage of techniques and company associations that are mostly familiar with what it means to be a dancer, So it's more structural to me, the distinction, rather than a personification. I think performance artists, well, for me, I'm an artist first as my title and occupation, let's say. And what I do as an artist is build and create multidisciplinary art performances. So I think performance artists kind of has more space and allowance to the multiplicity of being with how I create work and share work. And that also encompasses dance without limiting it to the dance world itself, right? Like we're here in this interview with the Music City Review, right? And I think that performance artists, as a let's say as a title, there's space for it to live within the context of other art forms beyond just the dance world itself.
Well, I think what your explanation reminds me of is one of the people that I studied and actually got to see live a long time ago when he was performing in New York. John Cage, the musician who asked us, in the way that I think you're asking us about dance, he asked us to think about sound in a different way, so that when we say music, we had certain limitations on how we were perceiving what we were hearing. And he composed a piece, I think it's called 4 minutes and 22 seconds, something around those lines, where the,
Silent.
the musician just came on stage and sat, and we were asked to not just perceive of the silence, but also the sound of the venue. And people from that point really started thinking very differently about what sound is and what music is. So I think that, yes, you're doing, I think, for dance, the same thing that John Cage was trying to do for music, the idea of opening the window, opening the space of perception for everyone. So I think that that's really exciting. The next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was the whole concept of Afrofuturism. That was something that I did not know about until I was on a program with someone who calls himself Future Man. And that's Roy Wooten, who played with Bella Fleck and the Flecktones. And what he's doing is he invents new instruments, and one of his most famous ones is called the drumitar. So it's a percussion instrument that's also a guitar, that's also electronic, so you can get all kinds of different sounds and rhythms. And I knew about groups, like Octavia Butler, who I mentioned before. In March of 2023, the National Museum of African American History and Culture had an exhibit entitled Afrofuturism, A History of Black Futures. One of the most common descriptions of your work is as Afrofuturists. I've never seen an interview where you've described it that way, but the New Yorker called it stylish Afrofuturist vision. The Guardian called it a fragile glimpse of an Afrofuturist world, which I thought was a lovely title. And the New York Times, an Afrofuturist visit to the Lunarverse, and they called your performance stylish and sincere, which to me could have been a little bit on the patronizing side, but the New York Times is the New York Times. Do you consider your work Afrofuturist? And if so, what is your definition of that concept?
I am very inspired by Afrofuturism, and the inspiration for me in Afrofuturism, and its definition to me is not one of a genre, right? It's not one. I don't think of Afrofuturism as a sci-fi technological genre or style. I think about it more as a proposition, as a call to action, and as a movement, and even as a philosophy of being. Like it's like the ability and responsibility for people of color, artists of color, to create new stories and tell new stories in which we are both the narrators and feature artists in the stories that have the possibilities of sharing a brighter future that potentially shines more luminously than its past, right? So without ignoring our history, can we also connect to the present by creating new artworks that we not only exist in as Black people and artists, but we thrive inside of, and that we get to be featured inside of. So it's more, for me, an ethos and a philosophy of possibilities.
That's really one of the things that the definitions that I found was from the Tate Museum, which is in London. They described it as a cultural aesthetic that combines science fiction, history, and fantasy to explore the African American experience and aims to connect those from the Black diaspora with their forgotten African ancestry. But one of the things that that definition leaves out is one of the major points that you're making, the idea of the future, not the past, the
Mhm.
future, and a centering that helps illuminate what may be coming or what could come or what are the possibilities. Which leads me to one of the things that I definitely want to talk about, because when I started looking more a couple of years ago into the whole concept, I thought about the first group that I ever saw that I thought that I now think of as Afrofuturists, which is Parliament Funkadelic. I just thought it was so. I was doing a postdoc in Chapel Hill, and they came to Chapel Hill, and I got to see them live on the Mothership Connection tour. And when they started talking about the chocolate Milky Way, and people just cracked up because we generally had not been included in the discussion of space and the future. It seemed like we were kind of stuck in the past. And what I liked about them, and also groups, really the whole funk era, groups like Sly and the Family Stone, everybody is a star. The whole idea that we could look to something that has more optimism, or your word, luminosity. But I noticed that in most of your work, they feel to me so far to be rather melancholy. The lighting is dark, the clothes design and colors seem muted, somewhat murky. Um, it seems like there are movements that seem as if there's some twitching, as if in pain. Um, I wanted to show a little clip of what I'm talking about, and then we can discuss it on the other side of it.
Honestly, what I'm questioning, offering here, is what happens when two men get into a ring of sorts with one another, and there is a match, but the match is not met out of combat or aggression or violence, but it's out of an intrigue in one another, out of an interest and a curiosity and electricity towards each other. I've never had support like this before. I've always produced my own works. No one has ever asked me to create work. I've always asked myself to, because I've always created, now going into my own independent artistic journey as a choreographer and artistic director, building a collective tribe. Once again, I feel propelled forward by the support and belief and advocacy of young adults.
So we see this idea that this is from, by the way, for our audience, Touch of Red. It's part of your Red series.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to go back for a second before commenting on what we just saw, because what we're bringing to Nashville is Black Hole.
Yes.
Trio, and it's a triptych, a part of my Black series. It's the third and final work in that trilogy. And Black Hole is, we talk about science fiction, or we talk about Afrofuturism. The term black hole is a scientific one, but my inspiration for creating a work and naming it Black Hole was not to describe the science of it, because I'm not a scientist, right? It's the intrigue towards the mystery of the cosmic phenomenon of a black hole, which is this dimension in space that has the strongest gravitational force and pull, meaning that anything in the black hole's axis gets swallowed and condensed into its core. And I felt that to be fascinating. This force that like a dimension can possess, right? That everything gets pulled into its being. But what also interests me about black holes is that no one knows where that energy that is pulled into it goes. There's sort of this like mystical, mysterious potential portal or door at the bottom of a black hole. And I found that to be interesting in terms of how we can sort of travel through time and space, the possibilities of shifting into new dimensions of possibilities, this idea of a portal being an opening into a new horizon. And those are some of the sort of qualities of Afrofuturism, and also more specifically, Sun Ra, who is considered to be the godfather of Afrofuturism, who I'm really inspired by, especially in terms of his being and his clothes, and he's so decorative, both from the outside and outside. And I love that sense of style and personification of being. But Black Hole, actually, the first song and that we use, the first piece of music that we use inside of the performance, is Sun Ra's Door to the Cosmos, which says something like, love and life interested me so that I dared to knock on the door of the cosmos. And I found that to be incredibly uplifting, not melancholic, actually. Found it to be one of possibilities, of openness, of spaciousness, right? And so I think Black Hole has those properties and qualities of an offering. Like, what happens when we, as three Black performers, travel from somewhere and into this new space, and that space is maybe unknown to us, but is full of possibilities, and it's the possibilities are also one of rebirthing ourselves into becoming, becoming further realized in who we are and who we could be through the connection between us, almost in this way of like a Holy Spirit, like the power of three, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Holy Trinity, right? Kind of come together to create something larger than itself because of the totality of each of its parts.
Well, it seems like to me that one of the things that's happening is that that's another issue that I wanted to bring up. I definitely want to talk about your Black series. But one of the things I saw in this excerpt that you seem to be talking about is not just our kind of place in the wider universe, but our place internally as you deal with the issue of vulnerability.
That's it.
And I think that to have those two figures dancing together, trying to figure out what is their joint space, what is their individual space, was kind of a fascinating idea. There was an interview that you did called Let Black Men Be Soft.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, of course, dealing with the Red series, but I do think it also has a relationship to kind of a relationship to the Black series as well that you'll be bringing with you. This idea of, you called part of the Red series a pugilistic pas de deux, which I thought was really interesting because, as you said in that interview, you're not that much a fan of boxing in and of itself, but the idea of the relationship between two people. You, let's see, it was described, I think you may have described it as how Black men can resist pressure and heat to allow themselves to soften, the power in vulnerability, the meeting of two individuals in a box space. But also then when you go to the Black series, then you're moving not in the broader space, but in the broader internal space. So external versus internal. It seems like there's some interesting coexistence of those two series. What made you call those series? I'm asking all these questions at once, so you can unpack them however you like. But what made you see all these series as, in terms of color? Those colors, are those meaningful to you in some specific way? One, I studied, I used to teach a world music class, and I studied Chinese theater, and the color Black on some of the masks that they wore was the symbol of honor and integrity. That was one of the first cultures I'd ever saw that had positive views of the concept of Blackness. And I thought, wow. And I also think Ossie Davis Jr., may he rest in peace, an actor, also said that one of the things he would love to see in the English language, especially in the United States, is more positive depictions of Black. Let me just back up and kind of figure out one question. I want to deal with the issue of vulnerability and power. I also want to deal with the issue of these series that are named after colors.
Got you.
Pick your poison.
I'll jump in and see what comes out. Yeah, so the Black series began with the first work being called Black Box. And the title Black Box, although 2 words, for me, it's one term, right? That stemmed from black box devices that are found, recording devices that are found on airplanes. You know, it's this recorder that is so powerful that of recording what has happened during the flight, that it's the only thing that could potentially survive a crash, right? So when I started to create, which seems a bit morbid, right? But I thought when I started to create Black Box, which was a solo performance back in 2015, I was writing a lot of prose, and I had a Black Box. I had a book that I called Black Box, and I started to play around with poetry and prose because I had a huge interest in making words dance. You know, I was so used to finding poetry through movement and through my body a lot, all of the time. But I thought, you know, as I was traveling a lot during that time, it'd be interesting for me to sort of track down, almost like a journal, but with more artistic proposition, what is happening to me, what is going on inside, what is happening between, what is happening around, and to get a sense of landing myself in these moments. And because I called it Black Box, because I didn't allow anyone to see this book nor to know of it. It was for me and only for me. And because of that, there was no censorship need. You know, I felt uncensored and unhinged. And then once I started to share some of the text and prose from that book, I decided to turn it into a live performance, which was my first performance, which premiered on my 30th birthday in my apartment for 30 close friends, and it was 30 minutes long. But to go back to what you mentioned about Black, the color itself, I also have a huge interest in the mixed meanings or many meanings of words. And for me, as a person of color, right, as a Black man, I have a lot of positive associations with the word Black. It is one of power. It is one of depth. It is one of colorfulness, right? When I think about Black people, I think about the colorfulness within Blackness, how much we embody multiplicity, just like everybody else, you know? So for me, it's more of trying to bring out the different colors and shades and tonalities that are inside of this Black word and this Blackness. And then I love how you described the difference between the Black series being something that's more, let's say, external, outside, more spacious, and something about the Red series being a bit more internal, inside, in terms of space. And so Red also, in terms of its mixed meanings and many meanings, is not just the color, it's also my name, my childhood nickname. Growing up in Brooklyn, my family and friends till this day, they call me Red. It's something I'm known as. So when I started to go towards a new series and tried to understand the distinction between these two series, I thought for the Red series, because of where I was at in my life during that time, that to bring more childlike wonder into my work and more lightness and play and vigor, and without losing its depth, you know. And it allowed me space to go into what comes up with me when I think about childhood and growing up as, you know, a Black man who is queer, living within Black communities, and always being like very sensitive, and having that been and starting to articulate and realize that that's a strength, not a weakness, right? And it's also something that we as people, and Black men especially, embody, right? We embody both feminine and masculinity and many other qualities of being. And I wanted to tap into a few of those qualities in the Red series, particularly because I was out of interest and curiosity. You know, let Black men be soft is not my term, actually. It's from an artist named Tatiana Lisa Day, who's a muralist, and she has this mural in my neighborhood here in Brooklyn, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, which is a predominantly Black community, and it's murals of this beautiful Black man with very soft, watery eyes, and there's a rose in front of him in the mural, and it says, "Let Black men be soft." And because murals are in and of the community, it's like street art, there's always a conversation that happens between the community and the art. So people started to white paint over the face of this man and remove the text. Then other people throughout time started to write text, including text into this mural, like, "Let Black men be strong, let black men be leaders of their community. If Black men are soft, they'll be preyed upon, and let Black men be protectors of women." And then other people would write, "Let Black men have all of the qualities allowed to everyone else."
It occurred to me that it was very much, I had mentioned to you in our earlier communication, the book Negro Land by Margot Jefferson, who lives in New York, a cultural critic, also started as a dancer, her training before she was a cultural critic. And her premise was she felt that there was so much strength expected of Black women that she wanted us to be able also to be vulnerable, to be softer when that was part of what we needed to be. And I remember writing a piece about color, saying that it feels like to me metaphorically that our palette, if we were artists, if our lives are art, that our palette so far has only been allowed a limited number of colors that we can use to paint our lives. And we want to be able to use all the sounds, all the colors, all that we are. And what a curious thing also is that the black boxes on those airplanes are reddish orange. Just so you know.
Yes, that's interesting,
So,
isn't it?
so I mean, I think the idea of let us be the entire human that we are. And
Yes.
I have a clip from Black Box. I was ready for that. And one of the things that I think ties what we're talking about now, your exploration of yourself, into what you were mentioning earlier about Black holes, is the idea of unknown spaces, or spaces that, kind of like the ocean, are not fully explored. There are a lot of mysteries left to reveal. And the clip that I have is a little bit of you exploring how you're going to use your body in ways that maybe you haven't used it before.
It's a movement that has a lot to do with the inability to connect to clear form. A lot about listening to gravity, the rhythm of it going through my body, and using other forces to oppose gravity. I think I want to play a bit more with speed in my legs, a bit more research with isolations inside of my feet, James Brown vibes. Also a bit more collapses and lifting inside of my chest, as if they're many small ping pong balls. This phrase was built when I first premiered Black Box. I'll show you what it was before I changed things. So now I'll use the same material to create more extreme range of movement, play of time, and extreme change of temperatures. Where I am now with the work, if the audience would come and see it, you'll see this moment condensed and sped up to increase the intensity. And I'll also allow a little bit more space now for things to become emotional and overwhelming so that they can go out of my body a bit further and a bit more with wildness.
One thing I loved about that is the visual exploration of space, those last hops where your legs are separating and your arms are flicking back and forth. as you free yourself into the wildness, there is much more lift. And I found that kind of to see that liberation before our very eyes is really an amazing experience.
Oh, thank you. I love how you articulate what you see and what I learn a lot about my work from having conversations and interviews with people like you. So I always say that, maybe not the best one to say what my work is, but I'm probably the best one to create it. So I also love to learn from what comes out of me and how that is articulated and fed back into me. And which brings me back to, this idea of vulnerability too, and having that be something from within that can, when explored, can be discovered more and could offer more, and that can create liberation, right, and freedom through the body and through the experience with others, right? Because when I would watch boxing, as I mentioned in the first clip, it was also a clear correlation between the mural, Let Black Men Be Soft, and what I experienced when watching boxing, which was this limiting of like the Black experience, with within masculinity, right? And for me, and what is probably Afrofuturistic about my approach is I'm not trying to resist boxing, or I'm not trying to comment on boxing, but rather because I kind of disdain boxing personally, but instead of looking away from it, I started to go towards it. And when I was able to go towards it with openness and curiosity, I thought, wow, actually, there's much more range there than I had once noticed. Like these two men who are in a match and beating the crap out of each other, they're working themselves up to such a match and that's based on winning or losing, that they completely exhaust themselves through the match.
Muhammad Ali said, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. It
That's-
seemed like at that moment, not only in his social and political life, but in his sports life, he was expanding possibilities.
Exactly.
And be how boxers can move, how they can approach their own sport, and the idea that you did not have to let your face, especially if it was cute, be destroyed, And so it seemed like to me that he was one of those people that, now that I think of it, could be conceived as an Afrofuturist, the idea that we don't have to play this game the way it has been left to us.
Exactly.
Find our own parameters.
That's it. And he was a dancer. Muhammad Ali is a great dancer. And in studying Muhammad Ali for the new work in Red series, Touch of Red, he has a footwork technique that is it's a movement in 6 counts that has a lot to do with his legs and his speed. And he's dancing. And there were also these moments with boxers like Muhammad Ali, incredibly proficient in their bodies and relationship to someone else's bodies, that they become so exhausted and they would literally collapse onto each other.
Yeah.
And that is a huge moment of vulnerability, of letting go, of surrendering without giving up,
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I wonder if these men have ever had that kind of close proximity and intimacy of touch.
Mm-hmm.
The man that came out of like the exhaustion. I can't fight anymore, right? And then I started to think, like, what if, for boxers, there are for a lot of Black boys, let's say, or even for me, growing up and people within my community, boxers are heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, wow, it'd be so interesting if 2 men of color were getting to a ring with each other, and the match would be meant not out of aggression or combat or violence, or even one of winning or losing, but something about this electricity and intrigue towards each other, camaraderie towards brotherhood, and
also liberation. The idea that it may seem unrelated, but I don't think it is. when Barack Obama was president, people saw him. One of the things that people were saying positively about him was his education, his level of education. And a number of studies showed that young Black boys in school did better in school while he was president because somehow he had shown them another path. Boxing was a path for some. The NBA is a path for some. But I think maybe for the first time, Barack Obama showed them another path.
That's right.
Education could be a path. And I really do believe you're showing a path too, that by especially including boxing, which is part of the Black community, the Black experience, showing that there's another way to represent a path that's already there, another path to take from that path, a detour.
That's it. I watched this interview once with Muhammad Ali and Nikki Giovanni, which takes place in this incredible red space, by the way. And Nikki Giovanni asked Muhammad Ali at some point if he would encourage young men and young Black men to become boxers. He said no. He's like, I've done that. You should go to school.
Yeah.
Become a scientist, go out of space. So it just made me what you just mentioned in terms of someone stepping into a new path and then creating more space towards options of detour, like Barack Obama did for Black men in education, is something that I'm interested in exploring and potentially offering with the work that I do as well.
I interviewed a dancer and choreography for the Nashville Ballet, Molly Sansone, and I asked her the same question I plan on asking you, is that does she have this kind of dream project, one that may never come to fruition, but something that if all the stars align, that she would like to do? And she said she'd like to do a choreography based on music and working with Dolly Parton. And Dolly Parton, one of my friends, my sister's friends, worked with someone who went to school with Dolly Parton and talked about her childhood, being poor, but always having that guitar with her, always having that determination and moving forward. And yet always retaining a core of what she has always been. It seems like to me when you talk about your upbringing in Brooklyn, that's what you're talking about, naming your series after this memory of your childhood, using the art of your neighborhood. It seems like you're retaining a core part of yourself as you move into these other worlds. I think you spent some time in Israel. How was that? What kind of effect did that have on your artistic vision, being outside the United States, no matter where it is, outside the United States?
Yeah, well, I lived outside of the United States maybe 13 or 15 years. Most of that time was spent living in Tel Aviv, dancing with Batsheva Dance Company under the artistic direction of Ohad Naharin. And speaking of dreams, dancing with Batsheva Dance Company was my dream job. I loved the work that Ohad Naharin choreographed. I loved the movement language that he created, which is called Gaga Movement. Nothing to do with Lady Gaga, but the language itself has a lot to do with igniting different parts of the bodies, playing with texture, our ability to make fun about, to be lighthearted, and the virtue of lightness, how we can be delicate and explosive at the same time. This fascination with all of these different parts of the body that dance offers, right? I really enjoyed the dream becoming realized while living and dancing with Batsheva. But once dreams are realized, realities are something different. And I had the best time living in Tel Aviv and dancing with the company. And I also realized a lot about my positioning there and in the world, right? I learned a lot about hypervisibility and alienation and tokenism. And at the time, maybe it wasn't I wasn't aware of how much it was affecting me, and how much it influenced my work now. Right. And how so much so that I've and leaving Butch of a Dance Company, I created a tribe, right? I created a group, a collective of artists from many different places within the African diaspora and beyond, that work with many different mediums of art, that is not led entirely by one figure. That although I am the artistic director and founder of Tribe, meaning that I'm in a leadership position, none of my collaborators are followers. They,
As Shirley Chisholm once said that if there's no seat for you at the table, bring your own chair.
there you
And
go.
so I think that, it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. You didn't realize there wasn't a seat for you until you went someplace else. And then you say, okay, that kernel, that seed is planted. There's a space I need. It's not there. I'm going to make it.
That's right. And
Claim it. Do you think you're making it or claiming it? I'm not sure.
Reclaiming, and I think it's a reclaiming and it's a seizing or seeding or cultivating of a new space. So I would say to your analogy, or Shirley Chisholm's analogy, about how, bringing a seat to the table, if there wasn't a seat for you there, I'm also curious about another table.
Yes.
And where there are seats in which we've created for us. And here we are, because I think there's room for more than just one table to be the place in which we can be actualized, right? So
one concept for a gathering process.
yeah,
Because I think often what happens is that we see the possibilities that we are shown sometimes blind us to the possibilities that can be.
there we go. That's it. Yeah. And I'm very curious about the possibilities that can be. And I think that, to answer your question in terms of dreams, Tribe, we're an arts collective that is based in Brooklyn, this is our 4th year of operations. I dream of expanding this collective into something of a house, where we get to really develop, artists get to come and develop their skills, their being, their space of creation where they feel supported, sheltered, promoted, seen, rendered visible, and giving the resources to really dig into the proficiency and capacity as artists and people in this world, without being hindered by barriers that have blocked us in the past, right?
Sometimes external, and as we've been saying before, external and internal barriers that may be blocking us. So, but let me ask still, I want to dig back into another question, is that now that you are kind of I'm assuming that the Black Hole is the end of your Black series, is part of this series, and you're bringing the last section of this tripartite work, Black Hole, called Triathlon, Trilogy and Triathlon. One thing I want to know is how does this relate to the rest of the series? And then now that this is pretty much at fruition, what next? Where are ideas that are percolating in your creative imagination? Where are you going?
Yeah. So Black Hole is subnamed Trilogy and Triathlon. And Trilogy because it's the third and final work in my triptych Black series. And Triathlon because I was really interested at the time of creating Black Hole, also with a triathlon is a marathon in 3 parts, right? So there's biking, swimming, running. And I was really interested to this race that is one of the most races. So I think that with Black Hole, it's also at the time where I was starting to create Tribe, and I was really interested in creating a space with this work where we get to thrive, where we get a sense of the future in which we exist, and regardless of the outside forces that may, swing us and move us or get in our way of going through this race, that we could do it together, that we are a strong force that can move forward with joint connections. And I guess with the Red series, like I mentioned, Touch of Red is the newest live performance duet of the Red series. And I think you said it very well, that the difference is they're both dealing with space. One is dealing with the outer space, like how these works of the Black series are in conversation with the space around us that sort of move us into policy, move us into possibilities. Whereas the Red series is the space that are contained within our experience, within our sense of humanity, within our qualities of being, within our emotionalities that get then that perspire through the physicality of the movement. So I think I'm going more towards, like, that's the direction and trajectory between where
Are you working on a new piece?
I'm sorry?
Are you working on a new piece?
I will begin to work on a new piece for the Red series starting this.
Oh, great. So you're going to continue that series. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to it. It usually takes me about a year to dream up an idea before I can say it out loud.
Mhm.
So I'm still in the dreaming process, I would say, but we will begin the movement research with a cast of 6 to 9 performance artists, mostly female presenting artists of color. We will begin this summer at Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston.
Mhm.
So
Is that your largest cast to date?
is
Also, so you are expanding your universe,
yes,
your on the whole space of trust to more and more people.
that's
That
right.
seems like that's a monumental step.
Yeah, yeah. And it feels like it's time, because the communities of people and artists that I've met along the way during this journey that I thought would be a lonely one,
Mhm.
itself to be a very collective one. And I want to honor this collectivity through the new work that I'm creating with these artists.
Mhm. Well, that is a great ending point, I think. I want to remind our audience that Tribe, with its founder, Shamel Pitts, will be performing at Oz Arts on February 2nd and 3rd, 2024. And I absolutely recommend that you go out and see this magnificent performance. I hope to be there myself. But thank you so much for spending this time. I know you have a rehearsal to get to, and we definitely appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with me.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. It's a pleasure.
Love and life interested me so that I dared to knock at the door of the cosmos.